absolutely love lost people. In my neighborhood, if you don't know Jesus, I'm more likely to hang out with you than I am if you're a believer. I'm not trying to be biased, but I am. So I love lost people. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not sure why. I remember when I first gave my life to Christ, I was about 10 years old or so, and the first thing I did is I went and found a buddy who didn't know Jesus, and I tried to tell him about Jesus. So I think it's just the way God's wired me. And I've been raised around a lot of people who didn't know Jesus, so I've just had this heart to help them to know Jesus. In fact, that was the driving force that led the calling to go down to OSU, because there were so many students there that didn't know the Lord. 55,000 or so students, as best we could tell, maybe 2,500 involved in anything evangelical, and they just need more and more help all the time. So in 2003, we went down, helped plant the church, and we saw student after student after student fall in love with the Lord, grow up to serve God, become leaders among their peers. We've sent thousands of students over the years to mission trips all over the world. Former New Lifers are actually serving in the Middle East, in India, and in Africa. We sent a whole team of people to Pittsburgh to help plant a church there in Pittsburgh. And we have many students, former students, who are serving in churches like right here in Gahanna and in Whitehall. My buddy Jesse and Melissa are there today. I think Jesse's birthday, say happy birthday, buddy, there in Whitehall. And it's just a privilege to have been part of such an incredible ministry. But I got the sense about 4 or 5 years ago that God was preparing in me a heart to plant again, to plant in a community, to reach lost people with the gospel. 2 years ago, I started to mentor the gentleman who would take over for me. He was a freshman in 2003. I watched him fall in love with Jesus, saw him do leadership things. He went off to the Middle East and taught English for a year, the gospel. And then he came back and he became part of our staff. And now Andy Kalin is the brand new pastor at New Life OSU. And as of June 1st, I'm part of the North American Mission Board, which is a missions organization as part of the SBC, a large group of churches, and I've been placed as a church planting apprentice in Columbus underneath a planter who's planted 3 churches to study and learn different ways to plant in a community. And so we're kind of gearing up teams, and I'm learning and training, and we're looking to plant sometime in 2018. So it's an incredible transition, very difficult to let my hands off of, because it's just been such a big part of my life, but so excited for what's happening at OSU still. And again, glad to be here. Now, when I say lost people, we're in this series called Love, what's love got to do with it? And last week, we talked about loving the city, that as we engage God and his love pours into us, we naturally work with what God is doing in the city, to reach people, to love on them. But really, that comes down to person by person, one-on-one, helping people who are lost engage with the gospel. When I say lost, there are probably some people in the room that might think to themselves, well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. Let me explain. The term comes from Jesus himself. That in Luke 15, he told 3 stories about a lost coin, a lost sheep, and a lost son. All 3 of the stories really mean the same thing. It's talking about the heart of God for people who have wandered away from God, people who are lost. They're not in relationship with God through the Son, Jesus Christ. God has incredible love for these people and has gone way out of his way to reach them, to draw them into relationship. You know that Jesus sent his son to die on a cross to pay the penalty for all of the sins that we commit, those sins that keep us separated from the Father. That's what Jesus did on the cross. What bigger statement of love could he make than to give his own son? And if he loves the lost, then shouldn't we? That as we engage the gospel, as we engage Christ, don't we do the same thing? Now, it's interesting because you may have a lot of lost friends in your life, but they don't come out and tell you, hey, by the way, I'm lost. So how do you recognize that? Look, you're going to recognize an atheist pretty quickly. But there aren't really that many atheists. You're going to recognize people who say things like, yeah, I believe in God. They don't talk about God a lot, but if you ask them questions and if you press them a little bit, they might say things like, I'm a good person. I go to church now and I give money. They say things like that because in their mind, they're trying to approach God on their terms. In their mind, if I just do this, then God will be okay with me. But there's never any peace in a person like that. And when you recognize that, understand that God has incredible value in that person. So how do we step up our game? It's an important time in our history that we as a church have the opportunity to openly share the gospel with our friends and loved ones who don't know the Lord. How do we step up our game? And my prayer is today that as we're listening to the Word of God, and as I'm speaking, that God will speak to you and to me about what it means to love the lost. So we're going to look at this incredible passage written by Paul. And Paul might be the greatest, evangelist of all time. Planted church after church after church, wrote many of the letters in the New Testament. And if anyone knew anything about how to love the lost, it would be Paul. So we're going to look at a little passage of Scripture in the book of Colossians in chapter 4 that he shared. And I'm going to say a few things as we go along, and I'm hoping that as I'm speaking, that God will speak to you about what it means and how we can step up our game and love the lost. So as we do that, let me pray for us, and pray just for yourself that God will speak to you today. All right, pray with me. God, thank you so much that you love us, that you have us in this place this morning, that your Holy Spirit is here, and I pray that you would just speak to everyone here. Open up our hearts, wipe off the calluses, speak to us the way that you want to speak to us. God, I will communicate as best I can, but I pray that you would simply touch hearts and you would change people from the inside out. Give us your heart for lost people. I ask that in your Son's name. Amen. Well, in Colossians chapter 4, when Paul wrote this letter, he was actually in prison. And the first thing I want to say about it is this, is that the importance of the gospel supersedes my circumstances. The importance of the gospel supersedes my circumstances. Here's what he says in chapter 4, verse 2. And pray for us too. I'm sorry, let me go back to this. It says, devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. Now that statement, he's assuming that this person is in relationship with Christ. When he's writing this, devote yourselves to prayer. That's an active, ongoing relationship with God as you're talking to him. And it says being watchful. That means you're watching for God's activity in and through your life. And being thankful. That means as you engage God, as you watch him working in your life, your heart is full of gratitude and thanksgiving and praise towards God who is working in your life. That's an active relationship with God. And in verse 3, he says, and pray for us too. Now, what would be so important that Paul would write a letter to these people and say, please pray for me? What would be so important to Paul at that moment that he's literally saying, hey, everyone who reads this, pray for me. And here's what he says. That God may open a door for our message so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I'm in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. He's praying that God's going to open a door for the message. Now, open a door, meaning he wants to share this message, and he doesn't want it to fall on deaf ears. He wants to share it, and that people in their hearts would start to engage God. This message so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ. Now, the mystery, if you just want to know what Paul means, you go back to chapter 1. In chapter 1, in Colossians, he starts to outline the gospel. He talks about Jesus coming in the flesh. He is the firstborn of God. He is the image of the invisible God. He lays down his life for those who sin. He's talking about the gospel. And here's what he says in verse 26. The mystery that has been kept hidden for ages and generations, but is now disclosed to the saints. To them, God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. This mystery is the gospel message. For years, for generations, people thought they had to go to God and try to honor him with their actions, with their sacrifices. And they believed if they just had enough faith to do all the right things, that God would honor them. But that's never been enough. God sends his son down to pay the penalty for all that so that we could be made right by him putting his spirit in us, Christ in you, the hope of glory. We can connect to the glorious God through the Son. That's the gospel. This message is what he wants to get out, and it's so important to him. But look, it was a mystery. But in any mystery, there's always clues. You see, God left clues to the people of Israel. Way back, God chose Abraham and his offspring, the people of Israel, to show the world who he is. This one nation would honor God, and God would show off. Now, you know that whole nation ended up in slavery down in Egypt for 400 years, and they prayed for a deliverer, and God sent Moses to be the one to help take them up out of Egypt. You remember that story? And then there were all the plagues. Remember the last plague? The last plague was that the firstborn male in the entire region of Egypt was going to die. But he told the Israelites, I want you to take a lamb, your perfect lamb, and I want you to sacrifice it and put the blood among the doorpost of your house. And then anyone in that house will be spared. So that when the angel of death would come down, he would see the blood and he would pass over that house to the next one. That Passover is exactly what God commanded the people of Israel to celebrate for 1,500 years before Christ. So that every year as they would celebrate how God provided a Passover lamb, someone that would be something innocent sacrificed so that the people would be spared. It was all a foreshadowing. Why? So that one day when John the Baptist said, look, there he is. That's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Everyone would go, oh, I get it, right? You see, the mystery was made clear, but it was a foreshadowing God had shown long before. If I had the time, I could go through story after story after story in the Old Testament that was all foreshadowing to this Christ that would come in the message of the gospel. You know, the importance to Paul was such a big deal that he was saying, pray for me. Now listen, I'm going to be honest with you. If I was in prison, I would write you a letter, and it would be, pray for me. Get me out of jail. Anyone got some contacts? You got money? Can we bribe somebody? Get me out of here. That's what I'd be thinking. I'm going to be honest with you. Not Paul. Paul's saying, pray that the door would be open for this message. You know, in Philippians 1, he actually writes, Philippians 1, verse 12, he says, now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. How y'all think it became clear? Paul didn't shut up. He was sharing that message over and over again. Why? Because his circumstances were not more important than the message. And I think it has to be that way for us too. There has to be a moment when for us, the gospel and the message of the gospel is more important than even our current circumstances. Let me explain how that looks for me. So back in 1999, I started a company. At the time, I knew that God was going to put me in ministry. I could just sense it. But I thought, I'll get a job where I can basically donate my time anywhere God wants me to do it. So I started a company. Several years later, I ended up starting a collegiate ministry in Gehenna. For 3 years, learned and trained on how to serve college students. And in 2003, we went down to OSU to help plant the church. The whole time I've been in ministry, I've also had this other job. So I've been bivocational. Now, the reason I had that is because, it's tough. Financially, it's tough working in a place like that. And it's, I've kind of had the company and had this. I had this to get insurance and, make things, ends meet. But I've developed some debt, some company debt and some personal debt. Some of it was just things that happened, tax stuff, medical stuff, car stuff, and some was just bad decisions. But we accrued some debt. So now I'm at a position in my life where I kind of need the company to help pay for the debt, but I want to be in ministry full time. So I've been praying, God, if you really want me on this journey to help plant another church, I just know that I need to be full time to do that. So God, please provide a way out, provide a buyer for this company. So I've been praying and praying and praying. Out of nowhere, a couple months ago, I got a phone call. My competitor is interested in buying my company. I'm like, what? So I'm praying and praying and praying. We're talking back and forth. We're doing, giving financial stuff. And I'm like, man, this could happen. He wants to set a meeting in Dayton. I'm like, let's go to Dayton, So I'm traveling. I call a couple of my buddies. I'm like, look, you got to pray for me. Because, I want this to go well. I do not want to blow this one. I want to be able to, talk, and help him understand what we do. Hopefully the business model, he'll want that, and he'll make a good offer, kind of important, So I'm praying. I'm driving, but I say, God, but it's your company. I belong to you. I represent you here today, whatever you say. I go into the meeting, and he says to me, so you're in ministry? I said, yeah, I've been in ministry, the whole time. I kind of explain what I do. He goes, well, how did you get into ministry? I said, look, let me be honest with you. I said, Jesus has changed my life. I said, because of Jesus. And I just started telling my story of how Jesus got a hold of my life, how he changed my life, and what he's doing in me. And I said, I have dedicated my life to help people know about Jesus. I said, what is your faith background? And he told me, same church I grew up in. I said, my father was raised in the same church. I said, he didn't become a believer of Christ until he was like 45. He said, really? I said, yeah, what happened was in the church he grew up in, he learned to do kind of the rituals every week. He would go to church, he would do the things, he would do kind of all the rituals that they were asking him to do. And he hoped and he believed that somehow in heaven, someday there would be these scales. And that somehow his good would outweigh the bad. And if he could just be good enough, then when he got there, that he would be let into heaven. And as I'm talking, I could see the guy, his eyes start to get bigger. I said, but my dad never had peace because he never knew if he had done a good enough job. He was introduced to the Bible through a Bible study. And as he was introduced to Jesus through the Bible study, he started to look at Jesus' life. And he started to wonder, if I could earn it, if I could be good enough, why would Jesus die? That makes no sense. And so what occurred to my dad was that this was really all about Jesus and what Jesus had done on the cross. And so my dad decided to put his full trust into what Jesus had done on the cross, and it changed my dad's life. On the way home from Dayton, I called a buddy who I knew was praying for me. And I said, hey man, he gave us an offer. He's like, really? I'm like, it was a pretty good offer. We're negotiating still, trying to work it out. I said, it's a pretty good offer. He goes, that's great. I said, I got to share the gospel with him. He goes, you did? I said, yeah. He goes, I don't know if I would have done that. Now look, did it occur to me that if I started telling this guy about Jesus, that he might back off the deal? Yeah, it occurred to me. Did it occur to me that he might think, I don't want to partner with some Jesus freak? Yes, it occurred to me that that could happen. But I'm sitting across from someone who needs to hear the gospel, and that's more important. That supersedes this deal. I don't need this deal as much as he needs to hear the gospel. That's how this works for all of us, that we need to see the gospel as more important than even our fears and our relationships. We have to understand this gospel message has got to get out. It's the only thing that's going to change people and change our nation. The second thing we need to realize is that the gospel message is powerful. The gospel message is powerful. Let's go back to what Paul said. In verse 5, he says this, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders and make the most of every opportunity. Be wise. It's like Paul saying, wake up, be sharp, put your head on straight, be ready. Make the most of every opportunity. I love the way the King James says that. It says to redeem the time. That means it costs us something to look for these opportunities. Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. That means he's saying, I want you to live your life on purpose in such a way that the way you live, your conduct, reflects the very gospel that you've put your faith in. So the way we live should earn the respect of people who are outside the faith. They may not agree with you and what you believe, but they will respect you because of the way you live. And as you look for opportunities, it says to redeem the time, to be on purpose so that when the opportunity arises, you'll have a time to share exactly what's in your heart. Now look, I think that if every Christian in our nation actively started to share the gospel, we would flood the world with the gospel. Amen. That would happen. So you have to ask yourself then, why is it that that's not happening? Well, there's probably a myriad of reasons. I'll give you one, just on my end. I know that there are times I'm just self-absorbed. I am a little too busy working my 2 jobs. I have a wife and 2 daughters, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on in my home. I mean, I have 2 little girls. Someone cries in my house every day. You know? It's normal. I'm busy, and sometimes I'm lazy. I just want kind of to be comfortable sometimes. I just want to do my own thing. And I just get so caught up in me that I'm just not paying attention to people around me. That's called self-absorption. It's like we've forgotten the importance of the gospel. We don't remember that, and then we just kind of forget how important it is to others. That is one of the things that I struggle with. I think a lot of people, they struggle because they're afraid that when they say something, they're going to suffer some kind of repercussion. They're going to suffer some kind of persecution. This is where you need to be wise. Look, I'm not asking you, to start sharing the gospel all over work and then get fired. I'm not asking you to do that. But you can live your life in such a way that there are times when people are going to ask you. You got to be wise. I think also a lot of times we're just so afraid to say it because someone might say to us, well, I think this, and then we're not going to know what to say. You ever felt like that? Can I just encourage you? Be wise. There's something I learned a while back that changed the way I see sharing the gospel. It comes in Romans 1:16. This is why you should always read your Bible. Because sometimes God will just speak to you. And it's like a gong going off in my head. Romans 1:16. Paul wrote, I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. Listen, you don't have to be really clever. You don't have to be snappy and smart and witty. You just need to be clear. Speak the gospel and let the gospel do its work. God is better at this than you are anyway. When the gospel is presented with a heart that is willing, the Holy Spirit intersects that person and uses it to help change that person's life. That is on God, and he's better at this anyway. So you don't have to worry about how clever you are. Just a clear presentation of the gospel. And let your trust be in God rather than in your abilities anyway. And look, if someone asks you questions you can't answer, just simply say, look, I don't know. And then just tell them what God has done in your life. Let me give you an example of how this works in my life. I'm always looking for an opportunity. If I get an option, I think Brian said earlier that the greeter at Walmart, listen, if the greeter at Walmart gives me an option, it's going down. You know what I'm saying? So one day I was up, this is a couple years ago, I'm at Office Max up on the North End in Polaris area, and I'm buying, my office stuff. I'm getting them in the bag, and then, I ring them out, and I'm heading out to my car, and I'm thinking, all right, it's time to get home. So I go out, and just before I get to my car, I hear, Ed from behind me. I turn around, I'm like, dude, it's a guy I went to high school with. Hadn't seen him in like 20 years. And so we're starting to catch up a little bit. He goes, what are you doing now? I said, would you believe it? I'm a pastor. He goes, no way, seriously? I'm like, I know, really, I'm a pastor. So we were kind of catching up about that. And he said, well, how'd you become a pastor? I just start sharing. I talk about how Jesus changed my life and how I've dedicated my life to helping others know about Jesus. He goes, I've recently had some spirituality in my life. I said, is that right? He goes, you may not know, but I've struggled with alcohol a lot of my adult life. I said, yeah, I kind of heard some things. He said, but recently, about the last 4 years or so, I've been clean. I said, how'd that go? How'd you do that? He goes, well, I started working the steps. And one of those steps, every day I get down on my knees and I pray to God because we're taught that we need a higher power to intervene in order to help us beat this addiction. Now, as he was talking, I'm listening to him. He has faith in God. He believes in God. But I got the sense, do you know Jesus, though? Do you really know him? Are you in relationship with God on God's terms, not on your terms? As I'm thinking, this is just kind of in my head, as I'm listening to him talk, I'm thinking, I said, buddy, do you remember my brother? He's like, yeah. I said, do you know my brother was an alcoholic for 10 years? He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, ruined his life. And I started telling my brother's story. I said, you know what happened with my brother? He knew all the information about Jesus too, but for the first time at his rock bottom, he said he felt Jesus put a hand on his shoulder and said, take my hand. And my brother decided to submit his life to Jesus. And he became a follower of Christ, and he is clean. He's been clean for like 18 years now. He serves in his church. He has taught recovery ministry. I said, he's completely different. And he said he did that all because of Jesus gave him that power. The guy looked at me like, wow. I'm like, I know. So I leave. I don't think anything more about it. A couple years later, I get a random Facebook message from him that says, hey. I'm like, hey yourself, that's kind of random. And he said this. I want to tell you that my wife and I are getting baptized Sunday. That's what I said. And then I said this. Dude, that's awesome. The Lord must be working in your life and your family. What a great picture for your daughter to see. Where are you guys going to church? I think you said you live in Hilliard. And he said this. We go to Life Point on Dublin Road. I've been hearing a lot about planting seeds lately, and I can trace my walk to us running into each other at Office Max a couple years ago. Right? Some of us in the room know who that person is. Can I tell you? I have shared the gospel with lots of people. I don't get messages like that often. But I'm dedicated to planting the seeds of the gospel and letting God do what he wants with it. I just want to challenge you guys. Remember, the gospel is powerful. When you share the gospel with people, let God do his work. Trust in the gospel. Lastly, I think Paul starts to give us some advice that we probably all need to hear. And I coin it like this. Go heavy on the grace and light on the salt. In verse 6 of Colossians 4, it says this. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. That last statement, know how to answer everyone, that assumes that you're listening to people. That assumes you're talking. Can I just say from me to you that if you really want to engage people, you've got to ask them questions. Talk to them. Listen. And it says to be, full of grace and seasoned with salt. The full of grace, I think that we have to remember that, when you put a little bit of salt on something, it makes everything taste better, right? You put a lot of salt on something, it's a problem. So in the same way that when we're talking to people, we need to be full of grace. That means we need to remember what Jesus has done in our life. Remember how he's impacted us with his love. You see, Jesus loves lost people. If you're not convinced of that, then let me ask you something. Were you once a sinner? Were you once far from God? Does God love you? Yes. So if that answer is yes, then you have to pass that same love on to other people. Here's the problem. I think that what we do is we shovel salt down people's throat. Too much salt. Let me tell you how we do that. We're trying to put too much salt on us. We're critiquing their life. We're looking at how they live, and we're looking at their behaviors, and we're just ready to slam them. Oftentimes, we're not even talking to them, but people ask us a question, and then we rail about people's behavior. Let me just say, that does not work. It may be true. You might really be offended, but here's what I think Christians do, and me. I mean, sometimes, as Christ gets in our life, he starts to change us. He changes our behaviors, and as a result, we become different people by the power of God. But then we look at other people who aren't living like us, and then we critique their life, and then we just want to slam them for their behavior. It doesn't work. I don't think that's what Jesus did. Jesus put the truth out there with the gospel. He addressed sin, but he was full of grace. If you were a religious person in that day, you were less likely to be seen with Jesus than you were if you were someone who was way off. Tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes, they were like Jesus' friends. Why? Because he was full of grace, but he definitely spoke the truth too. That's something that we need to hear. I think God speaks to me through stories. That's why I tell a lot of stories. Things happen in my life, circumstances where it just kind of hits me that, wow. A couple years ago, or several years ago, when I first got married, first year of marriage, maybe you guys can understand this. My wife said to me, Ed, we need to do something here. Now, here's the deal. Before we got married, I had a super single waterbed. Not like a queen, just super single. Don't judge me. I know some of you guys have waterbeds too. They were cool way back in the day. Anyway, so I had one, and I thought I was cool. We get married, and we're sleeping on the super single, and she's like, Ed, here's the deal. If you would just buy us a queen-size bed, a normal bed, I would be the happiest wife in the whole world, and I promise I'll never ask you for anything else. You would make me the happiest wife ever. So we bought a bed. I mean, that's what you do, About a month later, my brother-in-law calls us, hey, there's this puppy that is, been an orphan, and it's going to die unless someone gives it a home. And Tammy comes to me and says, Ed, if we could just have this puppy, I'd be the happiest wife. I would never ask for anything else. So we got a puppy, you know how that works. We had this little black fur ball, and it was all lab and all chow, all mixed into one. So labs are really playful, chows are really aggressive. My dog was aggressively playful. So it's just an awesome little dog. We play all the time, and because it's a boy, I finally had, some testosterone in the house, and we would play, and I would kind of wrestle with him and roll with him and whatever, and I would try to get him to bite me, and he would bite my hands, but only kind of like putting his teeth on him, but not really biting hard, and, we would just play like that. But he would never do that with Tammy. So one day, I took Tammy's hand, and I wrapped it in mine like this, and I got to wrestle with him, and he would bite my fingers, but not hers. How does he do that? This dog was just really gentle and kind. Years later, about 12 years later, he was getting up there in years, and he was suffering with arthritis. So we had him on a medicine to help kind of ease the pain of the arthritis, and, he was doing pretty good. But the manufacturer stopped making it or had some kind of delay in production, and so we had to put him on a new medicine for a couple months. And he was miserable. He wasn't himself. He was down a lot. He would grump, and he would try to move positions to sleep. It was hard to watch. Anyway, the manufacturer came out with the medicine again. We got the medicine, got it in him, and he just seemed to respond almost immediately. Well, a couple days later on the new medicine, we went up to Bucyrus to visit some of Tammy's family, and then we came home. So we'd been gone all day. As soon as he saw us, he was excited. He jumped up, and he came down, and as soon as he landed, he let out the largest yelp I've ever heard my dog do. I immediately ran to him, like, what's wrong? And he was holding his paw up like this. And so I went to grab his paw, and as soon as I went to grab his paw, he came down and bit my thumb. And when I say bit my thumb, he was on my thumb, biting as hard as he could. I thought my thumb was going to be crushed. And in that moment, I simply whispered his name to him. I said, Presley, 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 by the third time, he let go and looked at me like, oh no. Now look, I did not know it, but his body was full of cancer. His arm had broken in two that night. I did not reprimand him. I simply whispered his name. As I was preparing for this message, that story came to my mind, and it occurred to me, this is what we tend to do. We tend to look at people who are ruined by sin, like a cancer in their heart, and then we see their brokenness played out in their life, and it's like we want to correct them about their behavior in a moment when they need grace. I mean, isn't that what Jesus did with us? Didn't he kind of whisper your name at some point, and you heard? He's calling me. And that is what we need to extend to other people. That same grace to help people to hear the gospel message. I just want to encourage you that if you're here and you're like, I mean, I want to share, I just don't know what to say, then just ask questions. And James, the writer, said, be quick to listen and slow to speak. That implies that we're talking with them, we're listening. And then pray for opportunities to share the gospel. Like I said earlier, that sometimes, I'm just too absorbed in my own world and my own stuff. When it says redeem the time, it means it costs us that. We have to be on the lookout. We have to spend time and pray. God, give us opportunities. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you prayed, please, God, give me an opportunity this week to share the gospel with somebody? I just want to challenge you with that. There are people who are hurting. When you bring up Christ with them, you bring up the Lord, a lot of times they kind of back off or they put their head down. There's this tension that people feel. They might believe in God, but they know there's something missing. Let me tell you one last story. A couple months ago, there's a couple I was doing premarital counseling with, Tammy and I were, and we were having them over for dinner, and we decided we were going to order in, a nice restaurant up on Players Parkway, to kind of bless this young couple. And so we called in their order, and at the end of the order, the lady said, can I have a name for the order? I said, yeah, my name is Ed. And she said, oh, my dad's name is Ed. I went, okay, all right. So I, 20 minutes later, I'm driving up to the place, and they have, there's the restaurant, then they have like the separate room where they, you do carry out orders. So I go into this room, and she's the only one in there, and I kind of stand there, I said, hello, and she goes, hey, what's your name? I said, my name's Ed. She goes, well, your order's not ready. And here's what I was thinking, to be honest with you. I was thinking, I want to just pay for this now and get it over with so when the food comes, I can just get out of here. So I said, is it okay if I pay for the order? She goes, sure. I go up, and I see her name tag is Angela. I said, Angela, are you Ed's daughter? And she said, yeah, I'm Ed's daughter. I said, that's cool. I said, are you guys from here? She goes, well, my dad actually lives in another state, and I'm here. I said, why are you here? She goes, well, I'm a student at Ohio State. In fact, I'm getting ready to graduate. I'm like, is that right? I said, what's your degree going to be in? She goes, psychology. I said, oh, psychology? I said, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to go to grad school or become a therapist? What do you think? And she goes, no. I said, so you're not going to be a therapist? She goes, no. I said, well, then why'd you do the coursework? She said, well, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure what I want to do with my life, and I really like the coursework, so I decided to do that. I said, okay, well, what drew you to the coursework? She goes, well, I really love people. I love working with people. I love being around people. I love people, and I want to help people, so I took psychology. I said, well, have you thought about maybe social work? She goes, yeah, I thought about it. I can't do that. I'm like, well, why not social work? And she said, well, people with social problems, they have a lot of problems, and then because my heart is just so empathetic, I get caught up in their problems, and it's just not healthy. I said, well, that's pretty wise. Probably shouldn't do that. She goes, I said, have you thought about nursing? She goes, thought about nursing, can't do it. I said, well, how come? She goes, blood. Can't deal with blood. I said, well, that's a conundrum. I said, can I offer you some advice? She goes, sure. I said, when you interview for a company, tell them that you love people, you want to work with people, and you knew you'd be working with lots of people in a company, and you wanted to be an asset to the company. So you decided to take psychology so you would learn conflict management, learn how to deal with people and help people in situations so that you could be an asset. I said, what do you think? She goes, that's pretty good. I said, free of charge. I said, I've been working at Ohio State in a ministry for like the last 13 years, and the whole time I've been down there, I've watched person after person. They're forced to declare so early what they're going to do with the rest of their life. I said, I've watched student after student struggle. She goes, I know, same situation. I said, well, have you thought about what you want to do? She goes, I don't know yet. I said, can I ask you something, Angela? How's your spiritual life been? during your college years? And she just put her head down. Like, if you could see shame enter a room and cloak somebody, that's what happened. She said, well, in high school I went to church a lot, but in college I haven't done, the stuff that I should do, And just then, a girl comes in with my food order. I was like, no. So now I'm thinking, now it's awkward. She comes in and she goes, I need to show you the order. We need to go over it, make sure it's right. So we're going through the food, and the whole time I'm thinking, I got to say something. I don't know what to say. Now it's going to be awkward. And then when the girl gets done, she goes over and stands next to Angela. So she didn't even leave the room. So I'm like, this is going to be hard. I'm like, what am I going to say now? And I can't address this girl's sin issues. So I just went up to her. I said, Angela, can I tell you why I asked you about your spiritual life? She said, yeah. I said, I asked you because I believe that God made every one of us for a purpose. And then when God makes you, he knows exactly what he's doing. And God made you with this incredible heart to care about people. And there's probably a reason he wants you to connect to him so that you will understand why he's made you. And he probably wants to influence people through your life. I said, I just want to encourage you, Angela, to go towards God. And as you engage God, you will see and understand why he's made you just the way he has. She said, okay, all right. As I walked away I turned around to walk away to leave. And just when I got to the door, I turned back around. I said, Angela, I hope when I come back here, I hope that you're gone. I hope you've landed your dream job. And she said, please don't forget me. I have not forgotten Angela. I pray for Angela. In my mind, my daydream is that somehow she'll wander into this room today. You know what I want to say to her? The same thing I'd want to tell you if you wandered into this room today and you feel like, yeah, I believe in God, but there is this tension. There's something wrong. I've been trying to approach God on my terms. I just don't understand how to connect to God. I'm not sure if those scales work for me. You know what I want to say to Angela and to you? I'd want to say this. Jesus Christ came down to pay the penalty for all of that because you can't earn it back anyway. He did that because he loves you, and you simply need to rest in that and surrender your life to Jesus. Believe in what he did for you. Get right with God. I would invite Angela and anyone else this could be your moment to say, I'm going to follow Jesus. I just want to say that if that's you today, I invite you. What I'm going to do now, I'm thankful to be your guest today, but I want to invite all of us to engage God in prayer right now. So if you have a second, just kind of bow your head and prepare yourself to pray, okay? If you're here and you, as I was talking, you kind of identify with me that there are just times when you're just not aware. You just don't pay attention. You're not looking for opportunities. I just ask that you would talk to God right now and say, God, I'm sorry. The Bible says to repent from things. Just turn from that and say, God, I offer my life to you. Please use me to share the gospel with people. If you're here and you have someone in your mind that you know needs to hear the message, now would be a great time to pray for them. Just talk to God about them. And if you're here and you sense that that's you, you're like Angela, you know you've never made that decision, would I invite you now, simply say to God, tell him, God, I am sorry. I'm sorry for what I've done. Please forgive me for the things I've done in my life. Tell him you believe in what he's done on the cross. You believe that Jesus came and died and rose again. And ask him to come into your life. Say, God, please be in my life. Be my Lord and my master. I want to give my life to you, and I want to do it your way. The Bible says that, in the same spirit of prayer, let me talk to you. Just keep your eyes closed and your head down. When you make that decision to give your life to Christ, it's not just a personal decision. It's a public decision. And there's something special about that moment when you're able to share it. I just want to ask you, if you made that decision, let me be the first to know. I want to pray for you. Just kind of slip your hand up and say, yeah, I made that decision today. Thank you. Anyone else? You made that decision. Thank you. I want to pray for you one last time before the band starts up again. We're going to worship. But God, I'm praying for the people who are helping make these decisions. Whether you, it's the first time, or whether we're trying to lift up other people, God, that you would be in our lives this week. Help keep us awake to opportunities. And I pray, God, that you would work in our lives, especially for people making that first step, that they would engage you and learn what you want for their life. I ask that in your son's name.